Welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast with big new ideas about credit unions and conversations about innovative technology with credit union and fintech leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Qwillo, the real-time loan syndication network for credit unions, and by your host, longtime credit union and financial technology journalist Robert McGarvey. And now, the CU 2.0 podcast with Robert McGarvey.
There are times when credit union discussions about AI and how it's transforming their operations detours into a reprise of the classic Wendy's commercial, "Where's the beef?" That's to say, where are the measurable benefits arising from AI use? And then into my email box pops an email from Klacko, CEO of Kintera AI, who says his tools can be integrated into a credit union's back office operations in 10 days and that the results come quickly. What results? In a case study, Kintera clicks off results attained by an anonymous $3.5 billion credit union. For instance, a 90% reduction of file review time from 20 minutes to 2. And then there are big savings results for credit unions, $250,000 in the first year at the anonymous credit union, documented in the case study. There are still more pluses ticked off by Klacko in the show, lots of pluses. Skeptical? Also on the show is Chris Van Beek, now CEO at Massachusetts-based Rockland Federal Credit Union, soon to be renamed Arise Financial as of August 1. Rockland has been using Kintera tools for some months, and Van Beek sings the praises of these AI tools. And he also talks about the reactions of employees as they put AI into act. Understand, it's considered rude to ask a credit union executive if his institution is the anonymous one. Of course I didn't ask. For the record, Arise Financial, Rockland Federal Credit Union, is a $3.7 billion institution now. Longtime listeners will recall that Van Beek is a past guest. He was in episode 172 in 2021, talking about Bank Dora, an innovative neobank created by U.S. Alliance, where Van Beek was CEO. 3 other institutions joined in that creation. Listen up. So you are in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yes, sir, I am.
And I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. I'm not a psychic. I discovered it on LinkedIn. I was struck by, I don't talk with AI people in Cambridge. Is there more of an infrastructure there? Everybody I talk to is they're either in Silicon Valley or San Francisco or Toronto. I mean, it's pretty much it.
That is true. So there are 2 hubs in the US, right? There's the East Coast and the West Coast, and Boston, has a tech hub. It's mostly driven.
No, MIT is the best tech school on the planet.
Exactly.
I mean, that's undeniable.
Yep, exactly. So it's a lot of biotech here in Boston, right? But there's some tech. There's a lot of tech. Absolutely.
Well, look, Digital Equipment was a major computer company.
Right.
Just outside of Boston. I think DEC went out of business a long time ago. But so, yeah, there was, even back in the 80s, there was a vibrant mini computer business in Greater Boston. So,
yeah.
Good morning.
Hello.
Yeah, technically morning still. Sorry.
So we're going to talk about how this company with a funny name, and Christian will explain the name, is transforming your credit union. But Christian, why the name of the company?
Kintera actually means the source of origin. And, when you look at what we are doing actually with the credit unions, we always talk about the single source of truth, which today is, mostly paperwork. When you sign a contract, when you have a loan, a mortgage, right? It's paperwork, and that's a single source of truth. Now, data might be scattered all over the place, into the LOS system and the core, but it is still the single source of truth. So Kintera happens to have the same kind of meaning, source of origin.
All right. Now, Chris, I won't ask you if you're the credit unionist, the anonymous credit union in the Kintera case study. So don't answer that question because I haven't asked you the question. But could you tell me what benefits you've gotten from working with Kintera? And why did you want to? What itch needed to be scratched?
Well, I guess I mean, sort of real basic that, I'm a CIO at heart. I grew up as a CIO that they eventually let become a CEO. And then, even my prior credit union being a CEO of a credit union that, is IBM. And, the idea that there's just a foundational element. And if you've watched or AI evolve, Watson was one of the earlier larger names in the whole AI space. But for me, fundamentally, we as in our senior management team, we as in the credit union, and we as in our peers have been just really watching AI for.
And you were one of the driving forces, maybe the driving forces behind Dora, which was the
Absolutely.
credit union first all digital, all the way enterprise that grew out of U.S. Alliance.
Absolutely. Yeah, Spanish first. And really for me it's seeing opportunities like Dora is a great example, totally different purpose than a lot of the fun things that we've been doing with Kintera. But I think, as an organization, we oftentimes, or as an industry, oftentimes see fintech and related, and we think, oh, they're not playing by the rules or that kind of thing. And the reality is, I think we kind of create our own box and force ourselves to stay in that box. And I'm just generically a big believer that we have to constantly challenge, the box and make sure we're not stuck in there. And I think, with AI and particularly our partnership with Kintera, we've really, looked at a lot of different things and some really kind of interesting things, some things that have had value that, maybe not always the value that intended, but ended up being even more valuable in some other way, shape, or form. And Rockland was in, or Rockland, soon to be Arise Financial, has been in a really interesting place over the last few years because we've gone through this radical transformation. The way I describe it is, we've had a lot of deferred maintenance. So, whether that's facilities, whether that's core system, whether that's branding and marketing, whether that's imaging, you name it, across the board, we really hadn't made those investments. So we've been, doing that really heavily over the last couple of years. But at the same time, we saw the value in Kintera is that, even though we're not ready, we will still want to do stuff with you. So we've done a lot of little like projects along the lines that weren't maybe necessarily mainstream projects, but really fascinating proof of concepts. And as it's turned out, they've had a lot of future value that maybe wasn't anticipated, which has been really cool. Post conversion, we did a core conversion August of last year, and that's where we kind of focus more on the I'll call it just back office operations. And I think that I think if some of the conversations Christian and I have had, a lot of credit unions get excited about AI and they think it's a chat bot or a voice response unit, and those are great. But what we're really focusing on is the unsexy stuff, the stuff behind the scenes. I truly think it's super sexy, but other people don't because it's not, it's not necessarily the classic people interaction. It's really more work being done that's really kind of challenging work, monotonous work that's heavy volume, but doesn't necessarily add a ton of value until you really kind of pull back the onion and look at the core of what's really being done. And I think that's where Kintera, but they were valuable every step of the way, but I think that's where it's really starting to shine now.
Listening to you, thinking that you're an extremely eccentric, odd credit union CEO.
Yeah, probably a little outside the box. Yeah.
And I say that because one of the criticisms I've been raising about credit union CEOs is that as a group, they're remarkably risk averse. Remarkably. Now, you're a guy who's just done a damn core conversion. Most CEOs do that, and they're retired, man. That was their lifetime contribution. They hate to do core conversions, but if forced to do it, that's it. I'm not doing anything else. I did my thing, man. Leave me alone. I'm gonna check in for the next 10 years. You'll pay me. It'll be great. We'll love each other. But you say, no, I'm going to go into this wacko AI thing here too. That makes no sense, man.
On the surface, I agree. And I have this conversation with my wife all the time. And she's like, you do this, you want to do this and it's fun. It's making a difference. And I think, whether it was Dora or whether it's our partnership Kintera, I think it's really just, we're seeing value before maybe the volume of people see value. So I think the people that are looking at Kintera, different institutions today are like, wow, this is some really, really neat stuff. But, we might be willing to kind of take a look before it's really obvious. And,
Well, the hardest credit union for a fintech to get is the first one.
true,
It's
right,
easy to get the 100th one.
true.
First one, no credit union CEO wants to be first. They all say, who's using it? Who else is, oh, Navy Federal's using it? Okay, fine, we'll try. Or Digital is using it. Yeah. Okay, cool. Sign me up. Whereas you say, hey, can I be first? You need
Well,
psychiatric help, man.
well,
Well,
to be honest, Rob, I've known Chris for a long time, and this is not my first fintech. I had a fintech prior to that back in 2012. And Chris, again, was the first one when I was doing my other fintech, right? So he has that energy and that desire to
Oh
really
no.
be.
Hey, listen, I think he's a great guy. I
Yeah,
really admired Bankdora. I thought it was visionary, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just it's kind of trying to voice the
yeah,
credit union C-suite skepticism, the board skepticism. What? You want us to do something new?
well, to your point, I mean, honestly, true story, and this is going back 15 plus years, though. If you think about, I was CIO for DCU way back then, and we had a conversation. We were working with East Core or Vertify at the time, and we had an idea about check imaging and using remote deposit capture. And I remember coming back to the senior management team and saying, "Hey, there's this really cool thing. We're gonna be able to take a picture of a check and be able to deposit it. You don't have to go into the branch." And I remember, like, one of the senior executives saying, that's crazy. Our members will never take a picture of a check and deposit that. Who's going to do that? And I'm like, well, it's mainstream now. It took a decade maybe, but it became mainstream. And I think there's power for our industry being willing to take a little extra or deeper look and a little bit more thought process. And we have to be responsible. I totally get all the credit unions that would rather be the 100th institution, but on the other side of it, I think as cooperatives, we have an obligation for member value. I can't tell you how many times people, when they first did their remote deposit capture, I remember meeting someone at a car dealership and asked, why should I bank at DCU at the time? I said, oh, well, we have this new check deposit thing. And I saw him maybe a month later going back to the dealership, and he's like, I deposit checks at cocktail parties now in my neighborhood to show them this. Like, if that's really happening, that's adding some wow factor to us as financial cooperatives.
So what particularly attracted you to what Kintera's doing?
As Christian mentioned before, we've met before, we've worked on different things over the years. And honestly, it was really just like the clean, open canvas. And some of the things that we did early on were just more proof of concept. And it was everything from, assessing external considerations. We talked about some needs as it relates to a couple newer directors that hadn't been exposed to the industry. So trying to work on some tools that, might add value to empower board members. And then we were looking into fair lending. We had some fair lending audits going on saying, hey, proof of concept, can we compare what we had done in audit to what the AI could do? And extremely similar results and doing it in an automated fashion. So the proof of concepts came really quick and fast. And although they weren't kind of core operational projects, fundamentally they showed a lot of wow potential. And then we just kept building from there. We're a big indirect shop, have been for years, decades actually. And when you're an indirect shop, efficiency is a really, really critical element. So we showed Kintera, one of our bigger pain points, I'll call it the loan servicing. So this is the looking at applications and assessing whether it be for fraud or whether it be for typos, a VIN number transposed 2 digits or that kind of thing. And, after, a few meetings getting together to have not only a viable product, but one that really enabled us to provide better value, better service for our members, but also do it a lot more efficiently. So, the concepts, every single one of them, panned out, I would say, as a success. But I think, to go back to your original question, the attraction was, that clean canvas, that ability to say, hey, this is the pain point, help us, work with us to find a great resolution to that.
Yeah, I often hear from credit union CEOs. I'll ask them, are you looking at XYZ, some sort of new technology? Nowadays, what I hear is, oh, we'd love to look at that, but all our resources are going into trying to implement some Claude tools or chat or OpenAI tools. We just don't have the bandwidth. Bandwidth is the magic word, and it's the lack thereof. You're a sizable credit union, but you're not a monster. So how do you have the bandwidth?
I think it really just boiled, ironically, so I just came from a meeting. It was actually a training session with about 20 senior managers throughout the credit union. It was education of kind of level setting. So we had done surveys and assess, who's using what and why and their perspective on things. And this training came out of that. But I actually feel like it is not a question of yes or no or having the bandwidth. I think it's one of those that we have to continue to be relevant in the next years. And we used to talk in 5 or 10 year timeframes. I don't think 5 and 10 year timeframes are going to be around anymore. I think it's 2 or 3 year timeframes at most. So, to have the bandwidth, I think is creating a core competency that we have an educated workforce that understands AI, that is using it not just like at work, but weaving it into who they are as a family member. We were talking, prior to the training, one of the people doing our part of the training had mapped out his family vacation to Italy, or his wife and a wife and a husband, a trip to Italy, and how he used AI to map out that vacation. And I shared, my wife is kind of a snowbird. She lives in Florida. Half the year she just came up. I fly down with her and drive her up the car back with the dog, and it was about 1,500, just under 1,500 miles. And, a big Tesla person. Of the 1,500 miles, less than 5 miles were physically driven by us. That, the car did it. So it's taking these little things, and maybe they're not truly relevant as it relates to AI on a day-to-day basis at work, but it creates a comfort level that, okay, I'm appreciating if you can go cross country and drive less than 5 miles. And by the way, those less than 5 miles, those are like going through the Wendy's drive-through. That, it's not, driving because I can't drive. It's because, I want to, go order it at a certain place or that kind of thing. So I think it's, to go back to your question, I think it's really just about making sure innovation, and more specifically in this case, AI, is part of our DNA of how we look at solving member problems, how we look strategically at the next few years and long term. So I don't think it's even an option, personally.
What's the impact on the staff there? Not the senior executive staff, but the people actually working in the back office operations. Are they like Luddites? They're trying to break the machine, or what?
It's really an interesting question, and one that I think as you build AI, or I would even say build innovation into your culture, that almost becomes a natural thing. And as an organization, I think we're still in our transformational stage. I keep saying our deadline to be fully transformed is August 1st, where we officially become Arise Financial. And I said it somewhat tongue in cheek, but I do think it is a decent milestone. But I think from a day-to-day perspective, the result or the adoption of anyone within the organization is results at how it makes their job better. And I was super curious about what I would say my favorite project to date, at least, which was the loan servicing piece and helping enhance the indirect. And I was super curious of how that would be perceived by staff. And I thought it could be negative. I thought it could be confusion. I thought maybe even it possibly be a threat. But I was very pleased to find out it was incredibly well received, that staff loved it. And not only did they love it, but they were asking for additional features and functions and saying, well, since you do this, can you add this to it or add that to it? And it has really empowered the team. Historically, we've done between like 1 million and 2 million a day in indirect autos. I would say since we've invoked this, we haven't added staff. And we're now, I'd say on a slower day doing 2 million, and on a good day, 3 or even 4 million. And I think this platform has allowed staff to be able to operate that at a higher level, much more efficient, much more effective. And I would say even more playful about it. So, they'll send out the results for yesterday about midday. And, we kind of have like a little bit of a rah-rah session that, oh, hey, we did, 4.2 million yesterday. Nice job. That threshold used to be 1 million, then it used to be 1.5 million, then it used to be 2 million. Now we don't really celebrate it. Maybe on a 3.5 or something, we might have to say, hey, it's a good day. But the 4 million is the new threshold, is the new 2 million, I guess you'd say. And that really couldn't be done without this kind of product.
Now, Christian, let's talk about your tools. Google Gemini tells me you're not exactly an LLM. So what are you? Because everybody's talking LLM now, or agentic, but no one knows what agentic means, but they'll talk about it.
Absolutely. So we like to call ourselves an infrastructure or a platform. What that means is we help credit unions or financial institutions automate the back office operations, right? And as Chris mentioned earlier, what people like to call the non-sexy stuff, because you don't see it, but it's there and it's painful and you don't want to talk about it, but you need to solve it, right? So to answer your question, we're not an LLM. We are an infrastructure, a platform that allows credit union very easily to automate their back offices using a very simple product where you basically upload your policies and the AI will execute against those policies, right? And we build it in such a way that it's basically written in plain English. What Gen AI is good at is translation, right? So when you use a ChatGPT today, you want to translate something from one language to the other, it does it, or you want to translate into some software code, it does it, right? So this is exactly what I've done here, where plain English will actually translate into back office workflows, right? So there is an LLM component that sits in the cloud, which actually helps do some of the work, but this is not an LLM platform.
So take me through the startup with a credit union. And presuppose you're using the kind of things that Chris is interested in, those kind of problems and solutions. So what happens? You come in and I'm there and I give you access to a bunch of data and leave the room and say, knock yourself out, dude. What do you do?
Well, actually, the way we are approaching the credit unions today is a little bit different, right? So we go and we basically sell the vision, the platform, which is the AI transformation that Chris talked about. And we go in and we say, listen, when you look at the credit union, there's really 6 different departments that builds the operation of the credit unions. You have deposits, you have loans, you have servicing, you have auditing, right? And we say, well, where is your highest pain points, right? Let's optimize one of the departments first, right? We'll take the biggest pain point and we'll optimize it, we'll automate that, right? And then what happens, and we did that with Rockland, right? You start with one particular pain point, and then you automatically go vertically, because now, and what we're doing with Rockland, right? We start with auto loan, and now the mortgage team says, well, if you can do that for auto loan, right? I want it as mortgage as well, right? And now we're talking to other credit unions, said, well, if you can do that for mortgage, then I'd like to do it for ACH reconciliation, right? So it automatically starts to build horizontally around the credit union. And that's what the platform is really able to do, which is you don't have to buy a new solution. You don't have to buy a new point solution, new vendor. We can just go across the organization and offer you the same automation as we did with the first use case.
And what are the benefits for the credit union?
Several benefits, right? So when you talk about automation, you're first of all removing the mundane tasks. And Chris just told you, give you an example of that when he receives those order loan packages, right? There are 35 pages that someone has to literally walk through page by page to make sure that it is compliant. Right now, you talk about mortgages, we're talking about 650 pages. And we believe that humans should not be doing mundane tasks. Humans should be doing judgments, right? So what we do is offer an opportunity for credit to say, let's have your staff work on judgments so that you can actually create the value that you need for your members.
That's a really important point. And the idea that we're really just elevating the level that employees are working at. They're still making the judgments, they're still making the decisions, but they're doing it with a little less of the monotonous and from a much more empowered knowledge position, which is the best of the best.
What are the tangible benefits of going this route? Saving money, I mean, faster time, I should think. I mean, credit unions have always been, in my mind, extremely slow in processing paper. A lot of companies will approve an auto loan in 15 seconds. Credit union, 15 days used to be the norm. Now, I know they've gotten faster, but the credit unions are still quite slow, I think, compared to some of the bigger, less traditional financial players.
So
you might disagree, Chris. You might think you're just as fast. So tell me.
No, I for us, I mean, I think Kintera is a great tool to put us at that level that you're describing. I would agree with your comments. And coming out of our transformation, I think Kintera does a great job of putting us there, and not just on the member side, but also as an indirect partner. Our deal is appreciated because it's done faster, so they're getting their deals done quicker, which is great too.
Oh, so that's probably helping to drive some business your way.
Absolutely.
If I'm a dealer and I have 3 institutions that might be interested in this loan, but you're the fastest, then I'm bringing it to you, man.
Absolutely.
So Rob, there's really, to answer your question, there's really several benefits, right? So one of them we just talked about is to remove the mundane tasks, right? But it's to reduce the processing time for about, and in the case of Rockland, to move the processing time from 20 minutes down to 2 minutes, right? The second benefit is that, remember that a lot of credit unions or lenders, they only audit a certain percentage of their loans, right? So now instead of being able to audit 15 or 20% of those loans, you can actually do 100 of them, right? So what does that mean? It means that when the auditors are going to come, right, you're most likely not going to be found with a DOR or anything else because we found some inadequacies in the loan, right? And the third one is, of course, as I think Chris mentioned earlier, it's savings, right? The fact that you are now repurposing some of the staff into other operations within the institution, right? So there's some savings in terms of efficiencies.
And how fast do you become operational in a credit union?
So
many of these programs take 90 days, 120 days.
right.
I'll say 90, and it's probably more like 180.
Yeah.
But
So we can bring a credit union live on our platform in about 10 days.
wow,
Yeah,
Chris, is that true?
Yeah, I guess I was just going to make a comment in there because not only is it dramatically faster, but even that 10 days, there's a lot more value add. I mean, I'm an old school IT person, I'm a programmer at heart, and the idea of a cycle of getting the requirements and then starting the initial code, and then the enhancements and getting the feedback, that cycle, it's still there. but it's condensed into, a handful of days as opposed to 90 or 180. It's kind of mind-blowing for someone that kind of grew up in that old school programming cycle. And it's wild. It really is. I was going to add on to what, the other value is. I think, in my opinion, one of the other benefits of this, that's just a side benefit, is you get to know your business better. Meaning that, you can theoretically implement a module or software package and just kind of like take a textbook implementation of something. And it doesn't necessarily force you to better understand your operation. I think the way that, Kintera works, and generically to a large extent AI, is, you're really, as Christian shared, you're submitting your policies, your procedures, your day-to-day documentation, and that is being interpreted on the fly and making things happen. It's just as humans, we have a short attention span, I think, in many cases, and this really makes that short attention span have a better, bigger impact. So I think a side byproduct is just better understanding all things associated with your operation. It's a really cool benefit that a lot of people don't talk about.
Now, Christian, where does the data reside? Where's Rockland's data?
So when we deploy, we actually do that on premise. So the data actually never leaves the credit union.
Oh, cool. I'm a big believer in all my data is in the cloud, but then again, I don't have credit union for 500,000 members, credit union data. So, and I figured everybody's already accessed my data over the last 40 years that I've been online. So who gives a damn?
And even the bad people already access it too, right? I mean, every day.
Right. It's all, yeah.
In the newspaper that was a breach, and yeah. So
I don't even read the notices I get anymore. I figure if I see something awful happening with my bank account or credit cards, I'll do something. But until then, I'm blissful in my ignorance. So, Chris, what's your next project with Kintera?
Well, as Christian mentioned, working on mortgages, I think that's a really big piece of it. There's some transferable skills, I guess you'd say, from the indirect auto or loan servicing elements of it. I think, another one is just the intelligence element of taking enterprise-wide things that we do and, allowing that at people's fingertips. I mean, the way I look at it, Christian, you might be able to explain it better than I do, but almost like, you take the knowledge level of your best employees and you put it at the fingertips of all employees. And it's an empowering factor, and it's one that I think is just going to get better and better and better. We're in the relatively early stages of it. Keeping going. I mean, there's just no shortage of different projects. Our approach. I mean, we're first and foremost 100% committed to our partnership with Kintera. But as I described earlier, it's we want all of our employees comfortable conceptually with AI and education, risk, your question, where's the data, how is it being used, well, that kind of thing. And I think enterprise-wise, kind of being at that higher level, and then continuing to see what we can do ourselves in some cases. But Christian, I don't know, maybe you had a better way of explaining the knowledge-based tool.
Yeah, so the knowledge-based tool is really built into the platform, into the infrastructure that we have built. And to give you an example, I mentioned earlier that the different department within a credit union, and you can take any department. Let's take reconciliation, for instance, right? How today there's a lot of mundane tasks that happen in finance departments. They need to reconcile on a daily basis some of the general ledger with the core system, right? And believe it or not, this is done manually. And again, it is done at the source. You have a paperwork, you have an Excel spreadsheet, right? So anything that has some paper trail is an efficiency. And today, 90% of credit unions out there have those manual tasks, right, that are paper driven. So the next step is to use that intelligence and plug it into other mundane tasks, wherever they are: account opening, reconciliation, form intake, you name it, right? There's plenty of opportunity.
Now, Kintera is based in Cambridge, Mass. Kendall Square, I imagine.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. I lived in Cambridge many, many, many years ago, and Kendall Square was basically borderline slum.
It was.
But, but things have changed in Kendall Square.
That's for sure.
Now, where is your staff? Are they remote? Are they in Kendall Square? What's the story there?
We're all remote. Today for technology company, there's not really a need anymore to have an office space, right? So we're remote.
And Chris, what core did you convert into?
We were on the old Miser core, which really was a banking system, and we got to correlation, more specifically Keystone software by correlation.
Why that one?
Really, it was just down to the Keystone in one Fiserv platform. And honestly, I think either system would have been great, but I think the correlation folks just demonstrated maybe a more credit union like philosophy to a lot of things, and that really drew us in. So we've been very, very collaborative throughout the industry. We've had some very, very large credit unions, 150 billion plus come visit. Actually, they sent about 6 or 7 people on site for our conversion weekend. And I think our team was looking at me like crazy, like, why would you do that? We were going to be busy as it is. But I was like, what better assurance to get the A team from our partner correlation than to have a $50 billion cross credit union kind of seeing things firsthand. So it worked out well. I believe that credit union has signed with them as well. But we've been really pleased with that, and it's been a great foundation exploring it and understanding it, working with Kintera as well, which we would have never been able to do that with the old system, or at least not do it effectively, to put it that way.
Yeah, I haven't done systematic research, but what I've heard about correlation is that they're more pleasant to work with on a core conversion than some other vendors might be.
I would agree. And I would say, honestly, probably, if not the only, certainly, one of two that is the only one that is truly modern architecture out there. And I'm super curious to see how they will evolve with AI as well. It'll be interesting. A lot of these, the way software is developed is fundamentally changed. And I think the folks that are embracing it and kind of riding the wave a little bit, and the folks that are maybe more wait and see. And I don't know, with things changing so fast, I think you have to ride the wave one way or another.
I'm sure there are people asking, do we really need a core in this world of AI? Now, you also have to talk with the regulator about that, which they might be a little slow to say, oh, that's a cool idea. Let's try it out.
I think 5 years from now, I think that's going to be a fundamental question for many of us. I really do.
Christian, anything you want to add to this conversation? I think it's been quite good, but if there's some gap that I didn't think to go into, your time to spill it.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. I think I want to add one more thing is, Chris and I have the same vision, right? Which is that there's an opportunity here in the future to have, I like to call it AI native credit unions, right? That today, as Chris mentioned earlier, there's a very short window before AI will actually totally change the landscape of the industry. And when we talk about AI transformation or intelligent operations, the way we do at Kintera, I think there's an opportunity here to craft what the next industry will look like, right? What the next wave of the industry will look like. And I'm mentioning that because Chris and I, we are on a quest actually to start a QSO, right, a credit union service organization, where we will invite other credit unions who believe in the same vision to have the opportunity to be part of the next generation of credit unions, right? So building the standards of what the operation of a credit union look like. Because when you look at credit unions today, anybody who wants to do transformation, they have three choices, right? They can either, buy it from a vendor, right? And then you're going to have different solutions for the different problem you're trying to tackle. Or they can try to build them themselves. And we know that a lot of credit unions don't have really an R&D budget to do that, right? Or it's to become part of that cooperative, the QSO, where interested credit union can actually take part of building the future for the industry. So I think it's important because it's going to change. Chris agrees with me. It's going to change fast, right? And if we have the ability to be trailblazers in that, we can actually dictate what this will look like in the next 3 to 4 years. And that's the whole idea of the QSO, right? And Rockland is really the anchor in that movement, right? As the first credit union, and we have a few that are already committed, right? But we can start to see the movement that people say, I want to be part of this, and this is good for the industry, and let's build it together.
Are you looking at doing things like compliance tools? Because I know compliance is one of the things that's driving many small credit unions to merge. They just don't want to deal with it anymore.
Yes, I mean we have.
To me, that's a paperwork problem.
Yes,
really,
yes, absolutely.
It's a suspicious activity report. That's paperwork, man. 99% of the time, it's.
Absolutely. And this is exactly the purpose of the QSO. As I talk to more and more credit unions today, they all have different pain points, right? I want to automate this, I want to automate that. And I could be going into all directions. And the purpose of the QSO is to do exactly that, Rob, is to say, okay, let's have, 6 to 8 credit unions and decide what are the next 3 or 4 things that are most important to this group. Because if it's important to those 8 people, then it's going to be important for the rest of the industry, right? So it's the ability to brainstorm together, build something together. And if compliance is one of those, and it probably will, then this is where we will focus our efforts with the QSO.
Well, I'll tell you another thing about QSOs, which is that if you get like 6 credit unions, they then become 6 credit unions that are investor owners. They become evangelists for you. They will go to credit union meetings, buttonhole people, and tell them you got to do this. I mean, you can fire your whole sales force. Just turn it over to these credit union guys. Chris, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, actually, even to your question or comment about compliance, that was actually our first kind of like proof of concept, as I had mentioned earlier, is fair lending. And it did an extraordinary job with a very, very short time frame. So to your point, I think it's that compliance audit, all that. I think the stakes are going to be much higher. As Christian said, the idea of like even some of our systems that are running, we might usually, validate, 15 or 20%, maybe 25 if we were really aggressive. And now, using these tools to 100% verify everything. So the quality is going up dramatically in addition to the efficiency. And that's something, kind of unheard of historically, that to move forward on both fronts. And, I think the compliance game, the audit game are one very, very right markets for sure.
Before we go, think hard about how you can help support this podcast so we can do more interviews with more thoughtful leaders in the credit union world. What we're trying to figure out here in these podcasts is what's next for credit unions. What can they do to really, really, really make a difference in the financial scene? Can't all be mega banks, can it? It's my hope it won't all be mega banks. It'll always be a place for credit unions. That's what we're discussing here. So figure out how you can help. Get in touch with me. This is rjmcgarvey@gmail.com. Robert McGarvey again. That's rjmcgarvey@gmail.com. Get in touch. We'll figure out a way that you can help. We need your support. We want your support. We thank you for your support. The CU 2.0 podcast.